Thank you, Emily, for bringing us all these critical updates. We are continuing to monitor all of the latest news that is coming into our newsroom, including a UAV that was launched into Israeli territory in the north. The IDF says it was successfully intercepted by the Air Force, and sirens sounded due to the possibility of fallen shrapnel from the interception. We're also learning more details about the IDF in terms of what the operations are inside of Iran at this time. We also know that President Donald Trump issued a very stark warning overnight, telling everyone to immediately evacuate Tehran. We know he left the G7 summit early in Canada, and he's now back in Washington, D.C. Here's what he had to say earlier.
Thank you very much.
Have you spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu? When might you speak to him?
I've spoken to everybody.
What will you say?
Israel is doing very well, as you probably noticed. And I gave Iran 60 days, and they said no. And the 61st, you saw what happened. Day 61. So I'm in constant touch. And as I've been saying, I think a deal will be signed, or something will happen, but a deal will be signed. And I think Iran is foolish not to sign one.
Mr. President, Iran is accusing Netanyahu.
Look, Iran should have signed the deal.
If it would help bring Iran to the negotiating table, would you guarantee that the U.S. would not get involved militarily?
Well, I think Iran basically is at the negotiating table. They want to make a deal. And as soon as I leave here, we're going to be doing something. But I have to leave here. I have, this commitment. I have a lot of commitments. I have a commitment to a lot of countries, including the UK, where we just signed our deal. I want to see no nuclear weapon in Iran, and we're well on our way to making sure that happens.
We've had a discussion about that this morning. There's in the G7 absolute clarity in relation to the nuclear program. We do not want to see it.
Mr. President.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Japan?
A lot of them. Could happen.
To discuss, and joining us to discuss is ILTV anchor for ILTV Security Brief, Kalev Ben-David. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Shosh.
Tell me, what do you anticipate to happen next? We now know that Trump is back in Washington, D.C. after leaving the G7 summit early in Canada. He issued this very stark warning we messaged to the people of Iran saying they need to evacuate Tehran immediately. What is going to come next here?
Right. Shosh, I do think we have entered a new phase in this war. It looks like now the U.S. is starting to become more diplomatically engaged. It appears that Iran has changed its position and suddenly now very much wants to come to the negotiating table. Reports Iran is trying to seek a ceasefire. It's in dialogue with U.S. officials. There's talk of maybe even a possibly meeting taking place soon between the U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister. So I do think we're in a new phase here. We'll have to see. It all depends on the Iranian regime. As President Trump laid it out very clearly, they have to change their position on giving up nuclear enrichment, or they will face continued Israeli attacks. And we've seen the IDF stepping out. Even just here in Jerusalem, I could hear the planes going all night overhead. Israel clearly stepping up its attacks in Iran. But the key is that Fordow nuclear plant there, where there's a stockpile of enriched uraniums. I think President Trump is hinting to the Iranians, come now, make a deal, give up enrichment, or the possibility, and I say possibility because obviously until this point, he's denied the U.S. will do it. We could see the entry of the U.S. Into the war, attacking that Fordow plant with their heavy bunker buster bombs. So I think it's a critical moment for the regime in Iran, particularly.
Ask specifically, just from your expertise, your experience, Kalev, you've been reporting on the ground here for decades now. Have you seen any type of situation like this in Israel's history where the United States could potentially be on the brink of entering a very, very serious, extensive operation in a Middle Eastern country with Israel?
Look, it's never, no, not directly like this, but it does recall to mind I would say the first Gulf War, which I was in Israel for, and I did cover as a journalist. And you'll recall at that time, Iraq was firing its Scud missiles on Israel. A lot of Israelis are having flashback to that first Gulf War when they had to huddle in their bomb shelters. This went on actually for a couple of months. There were fatalities also, but the U.S. At that time was taking the lead, attacking the facility, Saddam Hussein's military operations in Iraq, and basically holding. It was almost like a reverse of what's happening now, where the U.S. was saying to Israel, don't jump in, we'll handle this. Here it's been the other way around. Israel has been saying to the U.S., we have this for now, but ultimately, if there is going to be a ceasefire, either it's going to have to be some kind of concession from Iran. Israel said it's not going to accept simply just a ceasefire. It wants to see a concession from Iran, either that it will give up its nuclear enrichment, or else Israel will continue to attack, target that Fordow plant, or possibly, and I am stressing again, possibly, the U.S. could potentially join in. We've seen reports of the movement of U.S. military personnel to the region, the aircraft carrier Nimitz taking position in regional waters. We've seen reports of these dozens of air refueling jets, these big jets used to refuel fighter jets from the U.S. Crossing the Atlantic. So a signal, President Trump sending a strong signal to Iran. Now is the time to make a deal or else.
And we know that the IDF is at the point, well, they will not allow Iran to have any type of nuke or possible missile threats aimed at them, right? We had Eyal Zamir, the IDF chief of staff, basically saying on day one of this, they are all in, and they're at a point of no return. We know that President Trump is still pushing for Iran to come to the table to try to make a deal with them. How realistic is it at this point, or will we get to a point where Iran will throw everything at the table that they possibly have in their possession?
You know what? It's a good question. Shows what do they have left to throw at the table? Unfortunately, we did see some missiles get through today. For example, luckily there were no serious injuries. But last night, first night, we've now gone for the first night where there were no casualties from these Iranian missiles. So it definitely looks like that their missile capability, their ballistic missile capability, is degrading under continual Israeli attack, and the fact that they're simply maybe starting to run low, short on either missiles or launchers. I don't think, though, I don't think when we talk about a potential ceasefire, no, I don't think like we're talking about in the next couple of days. I think Israel is going to insist that it at least complete its mission of degrading Iran's military capability. There's limited damage it could do against that Fordow plant, which is buried under a mountain, but it can still continue to attack both the military capability of Iran, its especially ballistic missile capability, and also strike at the regime. Now, we've heard talk about, we've seen, for example, that attack on the Iranian TV station, which is a major symbol of the regime. We have heard the Prime Minister Netanyahu not rule out the possibility that the Ayatollah Khamenei could be a potential target. He has been supposedly been moved to a safe location. You know, there were Israeli airstrikes reported in the far eastern edges of Iran, the opposite side from Israel, maybe demonstrating Israelis' capability to hit anywhere in the country. That could be a sign to the Iranians, if you don't make these concessions that President Trump is asking for, we are going to start really coming after the leadership of Iran, not just the military leadership, but the leadership of it. And this is, of course, could be a real danger to the Iranian regime.
So, Kalev, I want to also talk to you about the ongoing devastation that it still exists very much so in Israel. Remember, one day passes and maybe it felt like a quieter evening overnight. You know, there wasn't any real direct hits that had a true impact on human death toll or anything like that. But nonetheless, there are thousands of Israelis that are displaced at this point. Literally, all of their belongings are stuck in the debris after a lot of these buildings fell down from the power of these strikes. Can you please just describe to our viewers what it is like right now for a lot of these Israelis who no longer have homes, who are still dealing with shrapnel injuries, in terms of needing to pick back up the pieces of their lives?
Look, this is the part. This is for the home front, Shosh. This is unprecedented, and I'm speaking as someone who's been here for 40 years, and I have been in war situations here, and we did see attacks. For example, during that first Gulf War that I mentioned, the Scud attacks, which there was some fatalities, I think 3 fatalities over the course of 2 months. There were damages to homes during the second Lebanon War, in which we saw 500,000 people from the north displaced. And of course, just even the war with Hamas and over its firing of its rockets over the years from Gaza. But we've never seen anything like the impact of these ballistic missiles that are coming from Iran. And that's important to remember, even though I say that we're seeing potentially Iran's ballistic missile capability being degraded. Just one of those missiles we saw can destroy basically several buildings in a town like Bat Yam, which does not, where most of the house, and I happen to own an apartment in Bat Yam, in most of the buildings there do not have these safe rooms. And the buildings themselves are quite old, and we've seen the devastation. It's never been anything like this, I would say, in the history of Israel. In terms of the damage that we've seen potentially. So Israelis have to be very careful. That missile that we saw land and hit basically an empty bus today, that could have landed in a populated area, caused many casualties. Again, why Israelis must take every precaution to get into safe rooms, or now, if they don't have them, to take shelter in whatever, either neighborhood shelter. We know we've seen pictures, and you've done reporting from our reporters, and you've done Israelis taking shelter in parking garages and even in the underground metro system. So Israelis have to react to it, because we've never seen anything like this. And unfortunately, the government, again, I've said this before, because this had to be a surprise attack, Israel couldn't really prepare the civilian population for this. It couldn't really make preparations for displaced Israelis, because that would have been a signal to the Iranians that an attack was imminent. So the government is having to play catch up, and unfortunately, for a lot of civilians in Israel are paying the price for this.
Yeah, I have consistently gone out to a lot of these sites, Kalev, and I have seen the aftermath, the devastation, the toppled buildings, the debris everywhere. And I want to talk about the force of these ballistic missiles that have come in, and what could happen if there's any type of escalation in weapon that they use they potentially could fire.
There's a lot of talk. Right, there's been a lot of talk about the weapons being used by Iran. Let's make it clear, they do have very advanced ballistic missile weapons. One capability of these weapons is that they do have missiles that can change course in mid-flight. Some of these ballistic missiles, which makes it harder. It doesn't mean they're impervious to being intercepted by the Arrow system, for example, or David's sling, but it makes it much harder to do. But it was known that Iran has these weapons. We're not seeing, there's some people talking about hypersonic ballistic missile weapons, or they're getting new missiles from North Korea. These are advanced ballistic missile systems that the Iranians basically have had, and they've used some of these in their previous attacks on Israel. But in their previous 2 attacks on Israel using missiles, they targeted military targets. They were targeting Nevitim, the Air Force Base in the south, or Ramat David in the north. They weren't directly targeting civilian areas. There's no question now that they are directly targeting civilian areas For example, that strike on the town of Petah Tikva, not near really a sensitive area. So this is the potential of what we're seeing. And by the way, another very sensitive area they keep trying to attack, the Haifa chemical weapons plant. And this is, I'm saying something that's been reported, which is that there was one missile that struck. That is a potentially very dangerous area. So the threat still exists. Iran still has the capability to inflict serious harm on the Israeli civilian population. What it does not have the capability to do is inflict harm on Israel's military capacity. And Israel is making Iran pay for this and suffering. You mentioned President Trump telling people to get the civilian population to get out of Iran. That led to a mass stampede of people, of the civilian population of Tehran getting out. That came from the President Trump, not from Israel. And clearly, this is something it's undermining the regime in Iran, and that is, I think, what is driving Iran to the negotiating table now. The regime there, that their rule of Iran is being undermined, and that's why they want to see a ceasefire now as soon as possible.
Ben David, thank you so much for joining us at this time and explaining all the developments as they continue to unfold. Like we said, it was a relatively quieter evening, I guess you could say, in terms of types of damage that was sustained, which is a positive thing for Israelis, but there were definitely more sirens. We had about 4 sirens that woke people up. So thanks so much for joining and being with us today.
All right, stay safe, Shoshan.
And the IDF says they eliminated overnight one of the top and the biggest senior military commanders. The IDF says he was eliminated overnight using precise intelligence. Ali Admani was targeted at the Iranian regime's headquarters in the center of Tehran. They said he was the closest associate to the Ayatollah, and he was just appointed to the role on Friday. His predecessor was eliminated by Israeli opening strikes on Iran that happened Thursday night. Joining us now to discuss all of the developments is Major General in the Reserves, Gershon HaKohen, the former commander of the Northern Command of the IDF. Thanks so much for joining us and for being with us today. I first want to ask you about the ongoing situation inside of Iran. We know that this commander was just eliminated overnight. He was in this role for literally 4 days. What is the significance of a strike like this?
Of course, the main decision that was taken by Prime Minister Netanyahu was a very extraordinary decision, by being aware that we are knowing how we are beginning that war, but we are really facing into the unknown reality, because actually Iran is a superpower, a regional superpower with a lot of capabilities, with more than 90 million people, and they will not surrender immediately. And immediately we really found ourselves in strikes from Iran, and they can go ahead for days. More than that, even though they are realizing how weak they are in relationship to IDF, to the Israeli Air Force, yet they can contain that awareness of weakness, because it is due to their religious approach, that they can live under the awareness that that time is not what really was dedicated by them by God to get victory, but they can carry that with patience. And more than that, in the same way that they succeeded to deny from Saddam Hussein in 1981 the capability to end the war that was opened by Saddam Hussein in 1981. He intended to bring an end to that war in 2 weeks. And even though the Iranians found themselves in absolute weakness, they decided to overcome Saddam Hussein by denying from him the capability to end the war. And in that way, the war continued. to be a war of 8 years. It means that according to their tradition, even if they are weak, they are trying to concentrate their effort to deny the end of this war. The only way that they will come to deny to accept ceasefire or an end is if they will get a good deal by President Trump. A good deal, it means that the regime will survive and they will find new routes to go ahead with building all their apparatus of nuclear weapons, etc. They are not really intending to be honest with any agreement or deal. Therefore, right now, what the IDF doing is just to demolish more and more capabilities of Iran, of course, to demolish the capabilities of nuclear factory, etc. And we will see what will be in the new week. It could really go ahead for at least 2 weeks from now.
And we've heard the IDF say they're now freely operating over the Tehran skies with the ability to actually choose their targets without a point of confrontation by the Iranians. How did Israel accomplish this so quickly? And are we seeing the power of the Iranian regime dwindle at this point in time?
Of course, regarding the Israeli superiority, it is really exemplified by military superiority with technological superiority. And it is a great blame for Russian technology because Israeli really overcome the old weapon systems of Russia, including China, that the Iranian use them for air defense. It means that the Israeli Air Force really studied very carefully with their deep research, their whole systems of these weapons and succeeded to attack them. This is a great achievement and it will be really studied very carefully by Russians and Chinese. After that, the Israelis, with all that support, are constrained because we are not running to destroy the infrastructure and all civilians infrastructure, including the oil infrastructure, harbors, ships, etc. Therefore, by that obedience to that constraint, we are not killing civilians. We are not really, until now, destroying directly civilians' infrastructure, maybe here and there, because it is an outcome of a necessary retaliation, because they are attacking Israeli infrastructure, like the oil infrastructure in Haifa. Therefore, we must retaliate, but by the basic military operational idea, the IDF is directed to destroy the nuclear systems and the industrial factories for building ballistic missiles, not beyond. And I think that everyone in the Western world must really respect this Israeli approach, because it is very easy to destroy Tehran, and we are prevented from doing that.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your perspective on as all of this news continues.
I'll just say something else to summarize. It is not just a war of jet fighters against ballistic missiles. Of course, it is in the physical engagement. It is a war between religious attitudes. And the leaders of Iran are guided by religious faith that they must destroy Israel according to that commitment. It is coming from religious obligation. And therefore, it is not an ordinary war. It is a war with people that, of course, mainly the leadership of Iran, that coming to obey a missionary mission by God. This is their approach, and therefore it is so a great challenge to bring them the awareness that God is not with them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, that's all we have for our show today, but really appreciate your perspective on all of
Thank
this.
you very much.
Thank you.